Buster, brought to you by The Point with me, Li Xin. In this series, I dissect stories that are making headlines around the world and talk to my guests to compensate for the missing pieces of the puzzle. So join me in real time by sending us your comments or questions via the CGTN page on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube or Weibo. If you're watching this live on the CGTN application, email me at thepointwithlx@cgtn.com. Let me know what you think. We live stream Headline Buster on Thursdays at 11 a.m. Beijing time and air the segment on TV at 11:30 a.m. on Fridays. So do join us during the live streaming and get in touch. We would love to receive and possibly read out your insightful comments. As we come to a close of the year and it's time for holidays and peace and cheer, let me tell you a story at our last Headline Buster of 2021 to match the festive spirit. Let's call it a tale of two elections. The first one happened in 1992. A British politician contested but lost in parliamentary elections. So did he retire from politics? Not at all. He actually got a promotion and was appointed the chief of an entire region. But mind you, there was no election in that region to see if the people there wanted him, and he wasn't one of them. Would you consider the process democratic? Certainly not. But nobody really gave a hoot at that time, certainly not the mainstream international media. Who was that man? It was British politician Chris Patten, who became the 28th and last governor of Hong Kong. And now we come to the second election, which is set in present times, the Hong Kong Legislative Council or LegCo elections held on Sunday, December the 19th. For the first time in the history of the city, all seats were contested and the candidates ran on different platforms. 1.3 million local people cast their ballot to choose the city's 90 legislators. All this was unimaginable when the Brits were running the city. As I mentioned, the governor was appointed by the UK government and he appointed the Legislative Council members with the approval of London. It was not until 1993 that the governor no longer served concurrently as the president of the Legislative Council. Strangely, those who dictated affairs in Hong Kong are now branding themselves as guardians of democracy for the locals. They're also some of the most vocal critics of Hong Kong affairs. Were Hong Kong's former colonizers struck by lightning, which made them consider bringing democracy to the city in the early 1980s? Or was it conscience that compelled the last governor to impose an electoral reform just before Hong Kong's return to Chinese rule? No, they had more than 150 years to do that had they really cared. They knew it was impossible to keep the city in their grips, so they wanted to leave an honorable legacy. How? By making Hong Kong a semi-independent political entity. Very cunning indeed. And, as expected, right after the election results on Sunday, the UK issued a joint statement with its partners in the Five Eyes Alliance and expressed grave concern over the erosion of democracy in Hong Kong. How ironic. Well, some would say, don't compare things with those times. We have moved on. In the past 24 years, the city had elections. Why did Beijing want to make it better? Bernard Chen, a former Hong Kong LegCo member, gave me his personal testimony.
After what we've gone through in 2019, and even before 2019, our legislature in Hong Kong is practically in a standstill for quite some time. There's always a disagreement, and some of our opposition legislators oppose for the sake of opposing, and they demonize anything that has to do with the mainland of China. So, and that's not helping Hong Kong's and not helping Hong Kong's economy. I would assume that the legislature should be back in business. Mm-hmm. We should try to focus on addressing some of the deep-rooted social issues in Hong Kong.
So to give you a few concrete examples, Yao Wai-chin used the F word for the country of China during her oath-taking ceremony. Cheng Chung-tai put the Chinese national flag and Hong Kong regional flag upside down as a way of protest. Also, at a scene from the oath-taking ceremony, Long Chung-hang carried a banner that said Hong Kong is not part of China. Would such people have been allowed to run in any other countries? Should such scenes be tolerated or even condoned in the name of democracy? But that's not all. According to the official tally, during the sixth LegCo term from 2014 to 2020, under the request of some members of LegCo Council, the roll call for the meetings had to be made over 500 times, taking up nearly 90 hours. That's nearly 4 days' time, which could have been spent on serious problem solving for the local issues. And during the previous term, it was even worse. A whopping 1,490 roll calls had to be made, wasting 223 hours. During the past LegCo term, members had to be dismissed 97 times due to improper conduct. It was a higher number than 75 times in the previous time. 25 LegCo members were involved. Again, that was a historic high. Twice, some of the members throw unknown stinky objects in the council, disrupting the sessions. It's reported that at least 108 bills concerning livelihoods, including medical, traffic, elderly care and local infrastructure, were delayed over the past 6 years due to filibustering and other tactics deployed by some lawmakers. So, if Sunday's LegCo election was an erosion of democracy, should people return to the old days of dysfunction? Is that what democracy really means? Now let's take a look at how the mainstream international media cover the election. And the headlines, at one glance, looked starkly uniform. They could have come from the same journalists. The spotlight is, of course, on patriots. It's rather strange that anybody other than patriots should be allowed to run for public office in any country, but here, you see, patriots is almost invariably in quotation marks. What these headlines really want to tell you is that these are people loyal to Beijing or pro-Beijing in their definition. The opposition, on the other hand, is called pro-democracy. The underlying fallacy is that what aligns with Western or capitalist ideas or interests means progress and democracy, whereas China represents the opposite. But is that dichotomy true? Was the West the real champion of democracy? The British 1832 Reform Act is viewed as the milestone that established parliamentary democracy in Britain, but it never crossed the minds of the British colonizers to introduce democracy in Hong Kong until in the 1980s. That's 140 years after it started annexing the city. Instead, it was the Basic Law of Hong Kong, promulgated by the National People's Congress of China for the return of the city, that set democratic elections in stone for the locals and stipulated universal suffrage as the ultimate goal. And that goal was reiterated by the central government this week. So who is really pro-democracy? Another key issue used to discredit Sunday's election is the voter turnout. The Reuters report called it a record low. In this article, it says the 30.2% turnout, about half that of the previous poll in 2016, was seen by pro-democracy activists as a rebuke to China after it imposed a broad national security law and sweeping electoral changes to bring the city more firmly under its authoritarian grip. We've heard all of this before. By the way, is this a propaganda piece by the opposition camp or a news report by an international news agency, which should be balanced and objective? Remember that this was one of the first elections held in the city, still reeling from the traumas of protracted violence and the effects of recurring pandemic. Secondly, local issues such as housing and inequality are still daunting despite reinstalled stability. It would be unrealistic to expect great enthusiasm for the elections in the first place. But what these medias don't tell you much is that in the run-up to the vote, there had been an almost concerted mobilization to sabotage the vote by those who tried to derail it in the past. What do I mean? As the election drew near, there appeared to have been a campaign to discredit it as illegitimate to turn off potential voters. Let me give you one outstanding example. Despite it being an offense to incite people to boycott the election or cast invalid votes, 5 criminal fugitives, including former LegCo member Nathan Law, urged voters to stay at home. Just ignore them, Law said at a public event early December. We should not give any legitimacy to the election. We should not pretend we have an election. By the way, the organizer of that event was Reuters. They could have themselves explained why voter turnout was so low. And Law was also an invited guest to the U.S. Summit for Democracy for calling for others not to exercise their democratic rights. In the U.S., Brian Lone, who vandalized the Legislative Council in 2019, called the elections unconstitutional and illegitimate and not merit being called an election at all. Alex Chow, who was convicted in 2017 for an unlawful assembly that left 10 people injured and who is also in the U.S. now, called on people to boycott the election because it's a way to protest against the government. Does that help explain why some 2% of the votes cast on Sunday were invalid, a record high? These voices certainly did not boost voter turnout. But that's not all. These calls coincided with actions by extremist political groups which reportedly conspired to use violence during the polls. According to the South China Morning Post, a week before the voting, the police arrested 10 alleged members of a hidden group and seized more than 200 air guns, some as powerful as anti-riot shotgun. They think these guns may have been intended to disrupt the election. The Reuters article pointed out that the so-called pro-democracy candidates were largely absent, but it didn't tell you the reason. The Democratic Party, for example, chaired by Lo Chin-hei, did not field any candidates, and this prevented some of their supporters from voting, a result that may have been intended. Finally, stepping back, is higher voter turnout necessarily the symbol of the health of a democracy? The last U.S. presidential election witnessed a record high turnout of 67%. But how healthy is the U.S. democracy now? To the contrary, a member of a key CIA advisory panel said this week the U.S. is closer to a civil war than you believe. Maybe the high voter turnout was a sign of something else. It's clear, having said all of this, Hong Kong's woes are real. Although the 90 lawmakers have successfully been elected, they have to deliver, and the administration still has to channel and respond to the voices of all locals throughout its term. This is what China calls a whole process people's democracy. It doesn't stop at the polling stations. I think we have earned a break here. When we come back, we have a panel of experts and elected legislative members from Hong Kong for more on the city's democracy. Stay with us.
Patriots greet and celebrate. 90 candidates have been elected to Hong Kong's Special Administrative Region's Legislative Council after a vote held on Sunday.
I am one of the first-time runners and had never worked in the Legislative Council before. I feel the need to learn and to shoulder responsibilities. The Legislative Council used to be at times dysfunctional, but now it's time to solve problems.
The government says obstructions within the Legislative Council, or LegCo, as well as anti-China sentiments from some opposition forces, posed a threat to constitutional order and national sovereignty. Hong Kong passed a law early this year to improve the electoral system and fix the loopholes that made it possible for anti-China destabilizing elements to make their way into the power structure. So under the new electoral law, the LegCo has 20 more seats, broader representation, and patriots as members.
咁所以喺153名嘅候選人裏邊咧，都有唔同背景、唔同立場。
We had 153 candidates with different political views and backgrounds, and Hong Kong people voted for their favorite representatives. I believe the new setup has a broader representation, and we're looking forward to working with them.
會咧係衷誠合作。
Newcomers also held the balanced and broader representation in the elections.
We have a much bigger constituency. We are considering everyone within the medical and healthcare profession. That gives us a much broader view of the development of medical and healthcare system of Hong Kong.
The president of LegCo, who's been re-elected, says he and other incumbent legislators are quite willing to pass on their experiences to their new colleagues who have new ideas so that they can create more opportunities for the people and the city to thrive.
We can work faster. It's like a high-speed rail putting back on track, and we can press the button and go.
But young voters say political enthusiasm is not very strong among their peers, partly because they don't have enough information about the government's new policies.
The youngsters of Hong Kong are not familiar with the city's politics under the national security law and the new electoral system at all. I think it takes time.
The president of the Legislative Council says the new setup has to focus on economy and livelihood of people, particularly housing and youth employment. And that's at the core of the new electoral system and the region's course of democracy. Zhou Jiaxing, CGTN, Hong Kong.
Welcome back to Headline Buster, brought to you by The Point with me, Liu Xin. I'm pleased to be joined from Hong Kong by three guests. They are Dr. Hong Wen, member-elect to the Legislative Council of Hong Kong SAR, Henry Ho, founder and chairman of the One Country, Two Systems Youth Forum, and Dr. Fozia Nazir Long, associate professor of the School of Law from City University of Hong Kong. Thank you very much for joining us. Let me go to Dr. Hong first, because this is the first time I understand you have been running, that you ran for the Legislative Council and you won. So congratulations. Tell us a bit about yourself. What is your background and on what platform did you run?
I'm a newcomer to the political arena. I'm from mainland and immigrated to Hong Kong 20 years ago. And I'm running at the election committee constituency.
Mm-hmm. So what are the ideas that you're bringing with you to the Legislative Council? On what platform did you run?
Okay. Actually, my key idea is that currently I found that Hong Kong is, I found two divided Hong Kongs now. One, I call it elite Hong Kong, which is what we call the international financial center or the superconductor, that only elite can benefit from such a Hong Kong. On the other hand, we have another Hong Kong that is the place where middle class and the grassroots live, and it is suffering from hollowing out of the industrial, the unilateral industrial unilateral industrial structure, and the channel for youth to move up the social ladder is so narrow. Mm-hmm. So what I want to bring to the Legislative Council is new ideas that will diversify the economic structure and bring more opportunities to different people from different classes, including the middle class as well as the grassroots.
How do you look at this kind of assumption that maybe when you come from the mainland, especially when you are so supportive to the idea of integration, you know, of Hong Kong being part of China, that you are not democratic, that you are not representing the voices of grassroots people in Hong Kong? How do you react to that?
Yeah, I see the opportunity come to me when the central government make improvements in the election system. In the past, it's unimaginable that people like me would have a chance to become a candidate, not to mention winning the election. But now, during the whole campaign process, I participated in more than 100 meetings with the voters, and I found they really listened to my platforms. They really concerns what I bring to the table. So we have high quality discussions on my manifesto, and finally they put trust in me. So I think actually it is a very competitive campaign, and it brings opportunities to newcomers like me to join the parliament.
Yeah, well, you say it is competitive. Would you give some more examples as how competitive it was for you? For instance, how many people you had to compete against, how many potential competitors you had?
Yeah, actually there are 41 candidates running for 40 seats in this sector.
51.
sorry?
51 candidates, yes.
50 candidates. And they are from very diverse backgrounds, including scholars, or political figures that everybody familiar with, and also newcomers to Hong Kong like me. And within 50 days, I attended more than 120 meetings with election committee members from all kinds of social sectors, including the financial sector, the grassroots sector, the education sector, or even religious sector. Most of them carefully studied my manifesto and policy proposals. And we have a lot of relevant and meaningful discussions and debates. So I think that precisely show the current electoral system is rational and merit-based.
It was very interesting for me to hear your first-hand experience, of course, but let me get to our other guests for their perspective. Henry, welcome back to The Point. It's been a while. How do you look at the past elections and the significance of these elections for the democratic politics of Hong Kong?
Well, first of all, I think this is the first LegCo election under the principle of Patriots governing Hong Kong. I think there are three key characteristics. First of all is security. This time we have the vetting committee, which allows only Patriots to join the race, and thereby, we will totally remove those anti-China elements or those agents of foreign countries who want to disrupt Hong Kong, as we have seen in the past 2 or 3 years. And secondly, I think it's the healthy competition. Before, for our competition, we saw there are a lot of, like the election forum, there are lots of arguments, verbal attacks. So not many candidates are really focusing on the key issues. And in particular, I think most people, there are overly political issues discussed during previous election. But in this time, we have seen more healthy competition, more rational debate in geographical constituencies, functional constituencies, and even election committee categories. And certainly, I think there is really a broad representation. We have seen many candidates, not previously seen. For example, those patriots with a Taiwanese background, those candidates for expatriates, but those expatriates actually they live in Hong Kong like for 30 or 40 years, and bus drivers, etc. So we are really widening the spectrum of participation. I think that is really positive. And looking ahead, I think it is very good. I think the election has really paved the way for our further democratic development, which is we are pursuing a model with a Hong Kong characteristics, not only a Western style democracy. I think that's the main significance.
Let me go to Dr. Long here. Thank you very much for taking your time and joining us. What is your understanding of the different kind of prospects we're looking at? Because just now during my monologue, I listed a lot of the examples of the kind of disruption and dysfunctional scenes that the previous LegCo sessions were basically paralyzed with. Now with these electoral changes, what do you think does the future have in store for us now?
Thank you very much, Lucian. I would like to clarify that I'm an international law scholar, and I see states as artificial constructs, which are originally to be seen as historical and cultural entities. Right. So clearly, with this thing in mind, it is very important when we comment on the Hong Kong, we have to understand Hong Kong's unique and complex structure that you mentioned in your monologue. And the question of universal suffrage in Hong Kong is a very complex matter. It is intertwined with international law, question of sovereignty, constitutional law, democracy issues, and also the interaction between these two aspects. So to appreciate the status of political reform in Hong Kong or the future, which we cannot tell at this moment in time, we'll have to wait and see what happens in the next 4 years. As an we have to see it as in what will happen in the future. But it is necessary to appraise it from a multidisciplinary standpoint, looking at both international law, domestic law, examining the key instruments like the Sino-British Joint Declaration, also the basic law alongside the international text. So in my view, the solution or the situation that we can see in the future should be based on the mutual benefits rather than entrenching in a position point of view. This is very important. First point that I would like to make. And also, like you mentioned in your monologue, that it's very important to be mindful of the history of Hong Kong and the Chinese history as well, that how the Chinese during the 2 Opium Wars and the Western restrictions have actually suffered, and how Hong Kong actually was taken away from mainland China. And I would like to emphasize it is just not the piece of territory, but also which is connected to Chinese honor. And metaphorically, one could see it as if the baby is snatched from the motherland. And if the mother has so many children, even if have more children, even if the child is snatched from the mother, it will be not easy for the mother. So what we are now seeing, and how I see it, is that we are seeing a resumption of Hong Kong into the Chinese system. And there will be teething problems that will occur, and we have to wait and watch what will happen in the future. But we have to be mindful that whatever is happening is under the basic law, is within the purview of basic law, it's within the purview of the Sino-British Declaration. Mm-hmm. So everything that is given in an incremental way to Hong Kong, which Hong Kong never actually had complete universal suffrage, it's a process. And I think that the people need to be mindful of that, and they need to go and play along the system. Just nubbing it or not taking part, I think it's their own loss, in my view.
Okay. Thank you very much from those multidisciplinary academic background, which is and historical perspective, which is very important. We have just received some comments. Let's take a look at one of them. Yes, for instance, this comment from commentator T says, democracy means by the people, for the people, not other people, for other people. The word patriot is perfect. Yes, this is one comment. It's interesting, Dr. Hong, as someone who actually ran for the council, for the Legislative Council, how do you look at your role as a Legislative Council? And really, does the idea of being a patriot limit your capacity to supervise, for instance, the administration, to supervise, to come up with different opinions and to maybe challenge as well, to suggest, right? Does the word patriot bind you in terms of how to exercise to the extreme your responsibility as a legislator?
Yeah. Thank you for the question. Actually, some might argue that patriots administering Hong Kong will mean no meaningful scrutiny of the governance. I am afraid I cannot agree with that. Actually, parliamentary scrutiny is for promoting good governance in Hong Kong, serving the public interest in a better way. So I just cannot see why patriots could not exercise parliamentary scrutiny. That should be a basic duty of the legislature. And I think after taking office, I wish I could promote a new form of scrutiny. I myself call it constructive scrutiny, which means I don't simply criticize the government, but more importantly, I will provide better alternatives or solutions for them for reference. So we will try our best to work with the government and better serve Hong Kong citizens. So I think actions and the results speak. That is, and my response to the criticism.
Okay, we have just time to squeeze in another comment. Let's take a look so that more of the voices of our viewers can be reflected. Okay, from Han Tua, they continue to dumb down their own citizens with fake news and lies, resulting in their own citizens being brainwashed. The assault on the Capitol Hill is the end result of being manipulated. Henry, I want to go to you for your comments on this. Keep it brief, please. Yeah, exactly. You know, this idea, if you are running the Western style of democracy, you are pro-democracy. If you're running the Chinese way, you are anti-democracy.
Well, I think now we have seen more clearly the limits or the loopholes of the Western style democracy in societies which are already very fragmented, like the US. So if you are getting 51% vote, you may, as well, not offend the rest of the population, the other 49%. That's why I think in Hong Kong, the new model of democracy are really inclusive. In particular, the new election committee sector, which Dr. Wendy Hong, came from, they are looking more at the overall Hong Kong interest and also supplement the local concerns and also functional or sectoral concerns. So I think we can really see that, these are real improvements of Hong Kong electoral system.
All right. Finally, I go to Dr. Long once again and try to keep the answer brief. However, there are a lot of problems with how Hong Kong is governed at this moment. And there are a lot of people in the traditionally opposition camp which did not run for whatever consideration, but they might not have been extremists, they might not have been secessionists, they just didn't run for whatever reason. Maybe the threshold was too high or they wanted to wait and see. So how can their contribution be potentially brought out to help improve the diversity of opinions and improve governance eventually?
Well, it is a very difficult question to respond to. I mean, I really do not know why they did not, participate. But from what I read and hear is that they actually were criticisms on the fair that, vetting the candidates process will actually make them, not be able to participate and other concerns that they may have. They also contended that, restrictions in a candidate selection and vetting is not within the universal suffrage, or, it is not enshrined in the basic law. But I think that it is not to be forgotten that, for Hong Kong for 155 years was a colony, and it came back to China under the joint declaration. And it is very clearly mentioned there's one country, two systems. So the country has to be put together. So this is very important. I think that given time when we have the legislators like Ms. Hong, others, they work for the betterment of the people, and people need to see that, there is, it is very genuine. It is only a fair that is in their mind. I think that needs to be assuaged, and it will be assuaged over the time. That's, I think.
Yeah, indeed, time is running short for this edition, but your duty, Dr. Hong, as an elected member of the LegCo, has just started together with all the other 89 members. So a lot of hard work ahead. Congratulations once again, but, bravo, and we look forward to seeing you deliver on the promises you made to your constituencies. With that, we come to the end of this edition of Headline Buster. Many thanks to Dr. Hong Wen, to Henry Ho, and to Dr. Fozia Nazir Long. And many thanks to all those who have been watching this Headline Buster. From me, Liu Xin, here is as this is the last Headline Buster of the year, thank you so much for having been with us throughout this time. The warmest greetings, seasonal greetings from Beijing to you wherever you are. And we'll see you once again in the beginning of a new year. Thank you so much, and bye-bye. And you've got the point.